The day my daughter accidentally befriended one of the most powerful women in Colorado started with a peanut butter sandwich. At the time, I thought the biggest challenge of my afternoon would be convincing Emma that squirrels were not suitable pets. Looking back, I should have known better. My name is Caleb Rowan. I'm 43 years old, a widower, and the owner of Rowan Landscaping, a small business that keeps lawns, gardens, and public spaces looking respectable around Pine Ridge, Colorado. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't the kind of job people featured in magazines. But it paid the bills and gave me enough flexibility to raise my daughter. Emma Rowan was 8 years old and possessed a level of kindness that often bordered on dangerous. Most parents worry their children will talk to strangers. I worried mine would invite them home for dinner. It was a warm Thursday afternoon in early September. School had just ended, and Emma was sitting beside me in the truck while I finished maintenance work at Maple Park before heading home. The park sat near the center of Pine Ridge. Families visited on weekends. Joggers used the walking trails. Children played near the fountain. It was normally a cheerful place. That afternoon felt different. I noticed it immediately. Emma noticed it first. "Dad." "Yeah?" She pointed toward a bench near the far end of the park. "That lady looks sad." I glanced over it. Briefly, a woman sat alone beneath a large maple tree. She wore a dark coat despite the warm weather. Her shoulders were slumped. Her head tilted downward. One hand covered part of her face. From a distance, she looked exhausted. "Maybe she's having a bad day." Emma frowned. "A really bad one." The observation wasn't wrong. Something about the woman stood out. Not because she looked unusual, because she looked defeated, like she'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "Can I go say hi?" Every parent develops survival instincts. Mine activated immediately. "No." "Why?" "Because we don't walk up to strangers." Emma sighed dramatically. "You never let me help anybody." That statement was completely false. Unfortunately, she believed it. 20 minutes later, I finished trimming hedges near the playground and started packing equipment into the truck. During that time, the woman never moved. She remained on the same bench, alone, looking out toward the lake. Emma kept watching her through the windshield. "She's still there," I noticed, "and she's still sad." Also true. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. "Come on, kiddo. Let's go home." Emma didn't move. "Dad." That tone worried me. "What?" She held up her lunchbox. "I didn't eat my sandwich." My stomach immediately tightened. "Emma." "What?" "No, you don't even know what I'm asking." "I absolutely do." My daughter looked offended. "Maybe she's hungry." "Emma, what if she forgot lunch?" The woman appeared to be about 40 years old. She was wearing an expensive-looking coat and sitting beside a leather bag that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. Yet Emma saw none of that. She saw someone who looked lonely, someone who looked sad, someone who might need help. 5 minutes, she pleaded. 2, 3. I sighed. Parents lose negotiations all the time. Fine. Emma immediately smiled, the dangerous smile, the one that usually changed everything. Before I could reconsider, she climbed out of the truck carrying her lunchbox. I followed several steps behind. Mostly because I was certain this was a terrible idea. The woman didn't notice us at first. She sat staring across the lake, lost in thought, or maybe lost in something else. Then Emma stopped directly in front of her. "Excuse me." The woman looked up. Her eyes were red. Not dramatically, just enough to suggest she'd been crying. My heart immediately softened. Emma held out the lunchbox. "You can have my sandwich." Complete silence followed. The woman blinked. Once. Twice. Like she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. "Your sandwich?" Emma nodded seriously. "You look hungry." For a second I thought the woman might laugh. Instead, something else happened. Her eyes filled with tears. Real tears. "Oh." Her voice cracked slightly. "That's very kind." Emma sat down beside her on the bench without being invited. "Naturally. It's peanut butter." The woman laughed softly through visible emotion. "Good to know." I remained standing nearby, unsure whether to intervene or apologize. Somehow neither felt right. The woman looked at the sandwich, then at Emma, then at me. Finally she smiled. A small smile. Fragile. Genuine. "Thank you." Emma smiled back. "You're welcome." The conversation should have ended there. It didn't, because for reasons none of us understood yet, the woman actually accepted the sandwich. And sitting there beneath the maple tree while my daughter chatted happily with a complete stranger, I had absolutely no idea that I was watching the moment our lives began to change. I had absolutely no idea that I was watching the moment our lives began to change. The problem was that Emma didn't seem interested in leaving. Most children would have handed over the sandwich and run back to safety. My daughter apparently viewed complete strangers as unfinished friendships. "What's your name?" The woman looked surprised by the question. "Natalie. I'm Emma." "Nice to meet you, Emma." My daughter smiled proudly. "This is my dad." Natalie looked up at me. Her eyes were still slightly red. Up close, I noticed details I hadn't seen from a distance. The expensive coat. The elegant features. The careful posture of someone accustomed to being in control. Yet none of that matched the sadness in her expression. "Caleb Rowan." I offered a polite nod. "Natalie." She smiled faintly. "Thank you for not stopping her." I laughed. "I tried." Emma looked offended. "Not very hard." Unfortunately, she had a point. Natalie opened the lunchbox and stared at the sandwich for a moment. Then something unexpected happened. She took a bite. Not a polite bite. An actual bite. Like she hadn't eaten all day. Emma immediately looked pleased with herself. "See?" Natalie laughed softly. "You were right." For the next 15 minutes, the strangest conversation of my life unfolded. Emma asked questions. Endless questions. Natalie answered almost all of them. What was her favorite color? Blue. Did she like dogs? Very much. Could she ride a horse? Not well. Did she know how to make pancakes? Absolutely not. Each answer seemed to make Emma trust her more. At one point, my daughter leaned closer. "Why were you crying?" The question landed like a brick. I immediately stepped forward. "Emma." "What?" "You can't ask people that." Natalie surprised both of us by smiling. "It's okay." She looked out across the lake, then down at the sandwich in her hands. Finally she answered, "Because I had a bad week." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I hate bad weeks." "Me too." Another pause followed. Then Emma patted Natalie's arm. Actually patted her arm. "It'll get better." Complete silence. Natalie stared at my daughter. For several seconds she couldn't seem to speak. Then she laughed softly and wiped at one eye. "You know, I think that's the nicest thing anyone has said to me all week." My chest tightened unexpectedly, because she sounded serious. Very serious. We eventually stood to leave. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains. The park was growing quieter. Families headed home. Evening settled across Pine Ridge. "Bye, Natalie." Emma waved enthusiastically. Natalie smiled, a real smile this time, warmer than before. "Bye, Emma." Then my daughter did something that nearly stopped my heart. "You can come back tomorrow if you're still sad." Complete silence followed. I covered my face. Natalie stared at Emma for several seconds, then burst out laughing. Genuine laughter, the kind that reached her eyes. I'll keep that in mind. Somehow, that answer satisfied my daughter. We headed toward the truck. Halfway across the parking lot, I glanced back. Natalie was still sitting on the bench, watching us. Yet something had changed. The defeated expression I'd noticed earlier was gone. Not completely, but enough. Like a small light had appeared in a very dark room. The next morning, life returned to normal, or at least I thought it had. I spent the day working on a landscaping project outside the local library. Emma went to school. The park encounter became one of those strange little stories parents collect over time. Then Friday afternoon arrived. Dad. Every parent learns to fear excitement delivered at maximum volume. I looked up from unloading equipment. Emma came running across the driveway carrying a handmade drawing. Guess what? What? My daughter held up the picture proudly. It showed a stick figure version of herself beside a stick figure version of Natalie sitting on a park bench. "I made this for Natalie." My stomach tightened. "Emma." "What?" "You don't know where she lives." My daughter froze. Apparently that possibility had never occurred to her. Oh, for several seconds she looked devastated. Then the dangerous smile appeared. The one that usually changed everything. We can check the park. I should have said no. I really should have. Instead, an hour later we found ourselves walking through Maple Park again, mostly because I couldn't stand seeing disappointment on her face. The odds of Natalie being there were almost zero, at least that's what I told myself. Then Emma pointed toward the lake. Dad. I followed her gaze. My heart immediately skipped a beat. Natalie was sitting on the same bench, wearing the same coat, looking out across the water, waiting, and for the first time since we'd met her, I found myself wondering who she really was. For the first time since we'd met her, I found myself wondering who Natalie really was. The problem was that Emma had already decided the answer didn't matter. As far as my daughter was concerned, Natalie was simply the sad lady from the park. Nothing more. Nothing less. She's here. Emma took off running before I could stop her. Emma! Too late. My daughter sprinted across the grass carrying the drawing she'd made the night before. Natalie looked up at the sound of approaching footsteps. The moment she recognized Emma, something remarkable happened. She smiled. Instantly. Effortlessly. Like she'd been hoping to see her. You came back. Emma sounded genuinely surprised. Natalie laughed softly. So did you. Fair point. By the time I reached the bench, the conversation was already underway. Emma proudly handed over the drawing. This is for you. Natalie accepted it carefully. For several seconds she simply stared at the paper. The drawing wasn't sophisticated. 2 stick figures, a park bench, a giant smiling sun, yet the expression on Natalie's face suggested someone had handed her a priceless treasure. You made this? Emma nodded. So you wouldn't be lonely. Complete silence followed. Natalie looked down at the picture again, then away. Her eyes suddenly looked suspiciously bright. Thank you. Her voice was softer than before, more emotional. I love it. My chest tightened unexpectedly, because she sounded like she meant it. We ended up spending almost an hour in the park, mostly because Emma refused to leave. Natalie didn't seem eager for us to go either. The 3 of us sat near the lake while ducks drifted across the water and autumn leaves floated down from the maple trees. It should have felt strange. Somehow it didn't. At one point, Emma wandered off to chase squirrels. Against my advice. She does that a lot? Natalie asked. More than I'd like. Natalie laughed. The sound felt warmer than it had the day before. Less fragile. Like some of the weight she'd been carrying had started to lift. She's remarkable. She gets that from her mother. The words escaped before I thought about them. Natalie's expression softened immediately. I'm sorry. I nodded slightly. 6 years ago. Silence settled briefly between us. Not awkward silence. Understanding. The kind shared by people who know what loss feels like. Then Natalie surprised me. My mother died when I was 23. I looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time, the sadness made more sense. That's hard. She smiled faintly. It was a long time ago. Another pause. Some days it still feels like yesterday. I understood that feeling better than I wanted to. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Emma returned carrying exactly 3 leaves. Apparently she'd decided they were important. Good news. Natalie immediately laughed. Should we be worried? Probably. My daughter held up the leaves proudly. I found treasure. Neither adult questioned the statement. Somehow, with Emma, things like that felt normal. The strange thing was how comfortable everything had become. We'd known Natalie for less than 24 hours, yet sitting beside her felt easy, familiar, like she'd always been part of the conversation. Then her phone rang. The sound seemed to startle her, almost as though she'd forgotten it existed. Natalie looked at the screen. Immediately, the warmth faded slightly. The tension returned. Everything okay? I asked. She hesitated, then forced a smile. Work. One word, yet the exhaustion behind it was impossible to miss. You should answer. Natalie stared at the phone for several seconds, then did something unexpected. She silenced it. It can wait. Emma smiled. Good choice. Natalie laughed again. The scary part was that she looked relieved, as though ignoring that phone call was the best decision she'd made all week. Around sunset, the temperature began dropping quickly. Pine Ridge sat high enough in the mountains that evenings arrived cold, even in early autumn. Emma shivered slightly. "Time to go." My daughter sighed dramatically. "Fine." Then she turned toward Natalie. "See you tomorrow." I immediately looked at her. "Emma." "What?" "You can't assume people are coming back every day." Natalie surprised both of us. "Actually." She glanced toward the lake, then at Emma, then smiled. "I might." My daughter beamed, completely victorious. We started walking back toward the parking lot. Halfway there, I looked over my shoulder. Natalie remained on the bench, holding Emma's drawing, watching us leave. Yet something about the scene felt wrong, not dangerous, familiar, like I'd seen her somewhere before. Then the thought disappeared. By the time we reached home, I'd convinced myself I was imagining things. 3 days later, I would discover just how wrong I was. Because the woman my daughter thought was homeless wasn't homeless at all. She wasn't even close. And when her face appeared on every television screen in Colorado, our lives would never be the same again. The woman my daughter thought was homeless wasn't homeless at all. She wasn't even close. The problem was that we didn't know that yet. 3 days passed after our second meeting in Maple Park. Life returned to normal. Or at least I thought it had. I spent most of Monday trimming trees outside the Pine Ridge Community Center. Emma went to school. Natalie remained exactly where I'd left her in my mind. A kind, lonely woman who liked sitting beside the lake. Nothing more. Then Tuesday evening happened. "Dad?" Every parent learns there are different categories of panic. This was the serious kind. I looked up from the kitchen sink. Emma stood in the living room pointing at the television. Her face had gone completely white. "What's wrong?" "It's her." My stomach tightened. "Who?" Emma pointed harder. "The homeless lady." I turned toward the screen and immediately forgot how to breathe. The evening news filled the television. A reporter stood outside a massive glass skyscraper in Denver. Behind him, cameras flashed and reporters crowded together. Across the bottom of the screen appeared a name, Natalie Sterling, CEO of Sterling Innovations. My heart stopped, completely. The screen changed to a photograph. The same dark hair, the same eyes, the same face, the woman from the park, the woman eating peanut butter sandwiches beside my daughter. Emma dropped her cup of milk. It hit the carpet. Neither of us noticed. "Dad." Her voice sounded tiny. "That's Natalie." I stared at the screen, then at Emma, then back at the screen. "Yeah." My daughter blinked several times. "She's on TV." "Yeah." Another pause. "She's rich. Looks that way." Complete silence followed. The news report continued. Apparently, Natalie Sterling was one of the most powerful business leaders in Colorado. Her company employed thousands of people. Business magazines called her one of the most influential women in the state. Financial analysts discussed her decisions like sports commentators discussing championships. None of it made sense. Emma sat down slowly. "But what?" "She was eating my sandwich." Fair point. I didn't sleep much that night, mostly because the entire situation felt impossible. Yet when Wednesday afternoon arrived, Emma only cared about one thing. We should go to the park. I nearly laughed. Why? My daughter looked confused. Because Natalie might be lonely. The fact that she'd just discovered Natalie was a multimillionaire had changed absolutely nothing. By 4 o'clock we were walking through Maple Park again. Honestly, I expected the bench to be empty. People like Natalie Sterling didn't spend afternoons sitting beside lakes in small-town parks. People like Natalie Sterling appeared on magazine covers and flew on private jets. At least that's what I assumed. Then Emma stopped walking. "See?" I followed her gaze. Natalie sat on the same bench, looking out across the water, holding Emma's drawing. My brain officially gave up. "Told you." My daughter sounded pleased with herself. Natalie noticed us approaching. The moment she saw Emma, she smiled. The same warm smile from before. Not the polished smile from television interviews. The real one. "Hi." Emma immediately folded her arms. "You lied." Complete silence. Natalie's eyes widened. "I did? You're not homeless." I covered my face. Natalie stared at Emma for several seconds, then laughed so hard she nearly dropped the drawing. No. Another laugh. I'm not homeless. My daughter looked relieved. Good. Natalie blinked. Good? I was worried about winter. Neither of us knew how to respond to that. Evanite's heights hard from her eyes. That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. Emma nodded seriously. You're welcome. The conversation should have been awkward after that. It wasn't. Somehow the truth changed nothing, at least not for Emma. 10 minutes later, she was telling Natalie about school. 20 minutes later, she was showing off a collection of unusual rocks she'd found near the lake. 30 minutes later, she was explaining why ducks were secretly smarter than most people. Natalie listened to all of it. Every word, every story, every ridiculous observation. Then, while Emma chased ducks across the grass, I finally asked the question, "Why didn't you tell us?" Natalie looked toward the water. The smile faded slightly. Because it was nice. What was? Another pause. Then she held up Emma's drawing. This. Her voice softened. She didn't know who I was. I understood immediately. More than I wanted to. Natalie laughed quietly. Do you know how many people talk to me because of my title? I didn't answer. She already knew. Emma talked to me because I looked sad. The honesty landed heavily between us. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Natalie surprised me. Can I tell you a secret? Sure. She looked down at the drawing again, then smiled sadly. That week, another pause. I was thinking about quitting. My heart tightened. Quitting what? Natalie laughed softly. Everything. The word hung in the air. Serious. Honest. Real. And sitting beside her while my daughter chased ducks across a mountain park, I suddenly realized something important. Natalie Sterling wasn't sitting on that bench because she was lonely. She was sitting there because she was lost. And somehow, against all odds, Emma had found her. Somehow, against all odds, Emma had found her. The problem was that neither Natalie nor I seemed entirely sure what to do about it. The late afternoon sun reflected across the lake, while Emma continued her highly important mission of negotiating with ducks. According to my daughter, they were misunderstood geniuses. The ducks appeared unconvinced. Beside me, Natalie watched the scene with a smile that looked both happy and sad at the same time. She does that a lot? What? Natalie nodded toward Emma. Makes people feel better without realizing it. I laughed softly. Pretty much every day. The smile lingered on Natalie's face. That's rare. Her voice sounded distant somehow. Thoughtful, like she was remembering something she'd lost. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The wind moved gently across the lake. Autumn leaves drifted along the shoreline. The entire park felt peaceful. Then Natalie surprised me. Do you know how many people called me last week? I looked at her. A lot? She laughed softly. 237. My brain immediately stopped functioning. Seriously? Natalie nodded. Board members, investors, journalists, attorneys, executives. Another pause. 237 people. She held up Emma's drawing. Not one of them asked if I was okay. The words landed harder than she probably intended. Because they were completely honest. Emma did. Natalie's smile returned. Small, emotional, real. Yeah. Another pause. She did. Across the grass, Emma suddenly appeared carrying 3 feathers and what looked suspiciously like part of a pine cone. Good news. Natalie immediately laughed. Should we be worried? Probably. My daughter held up the feathers proudly. I made friends. Neither of us questioned it. At this point, questioning Emma's logic felt pointless. We ended up staying in the park until sunset. Longer than any of us intended. The strange thing was how easy it felt. No pressure, no expectations, no titles. Natalie wasn't a CEO there. She was simply Natalie, the woman who laughed at Emma's stories and somehow understood what it meant to lose someone important. Eventually, the temperature began dropping. Pine Ridge evenings arrived quickly in autumn. Emma shivered and wrapped her arms around herself. Time to go. My daughter sighed dramatically. Fine. Then she looked at Natalie. Tomorrow? The question hung in the air. Natalie smiled. Tomorrow. Emma nodded confidently. Apparently, the arrangement had been finalized. The next afternoon, Natalie was already waiting when we arrived. This time she wasn't sitting alone. She was feeding breadcrumbs to birds near the lake. Emma immediately ran toward her. "You came." Natalie laughed. "I said I would." Something about that answer mattered. A lot. The following days settled into a strange routine. Every afternoon after school, we'd stop by Maple Park. Every afternoon Natalie would be there. Sometimes they walked around the lake. Sometimes they sat on the bench talking. Sometimes Emma read stories aloud from library books she'd borrowed specifically for Natalie. Through all of it, I noticed something changing. The sadness wasn't disappearing completely, but it was fading, little by little, day by day. One Friday afternoon, Emma arrived carrying a small notebook. "What's that?" Natalie asked. My daughter smiled proudly. "Operation Happy Natalie." I immediately covered my face. Natalie nearly choked laughing. "Operation what?" Emma opened the notebook. Several pages were filled with handwritten notes, drawings, lists, plans. "These are things that make people happy." Complete silence followed. Natalie looked genuinely stunned. "You made a happiness notebook?" "Yep." Emma pointed to the first page. "Number 1, Natalie leaned closer. "Ice cream?" "Correct." Another page. "Number 2, dogs." "Correct." Another page. "Number 3, Natalie laughed before reading it. "Friends." Emma nodded. "Most important one." Something changed in Natalie's expression. Not dramatically, just enough, like somebody had quietly touched a bruise she'd been hiding. She looked down at the notebook, then at Emma. Finally she smiled. A smile so genuine it almost hurt to look at. "You're pretty smart." My daughter looked pleased. "I know." The scary thing was that she wasn't wrong. Later that evening, after Emma wandered off toward the playground, Natalie and I sat beside the lake watching the sunset. The mountains glowed orange and gold in the distance. Everything felt calm, peaceful. Then her phone rang. The expression on her face changed immediately. The familiar tension returned. "Work?" I asked. Natalie stared at the screen, then sighed. "Always." For a moment, she looked exhausted again. The version of Natalie we'd met that first day. The woman sitting alone on a bench trying not to cry. Finally she answered the call. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Yet when she hung up, her entire mood had shifted. "Everything okay?" Natalie laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because she didn't know what else to do. "The board wants me in Denver Monday." Another pause. "Emergency meeting." My stomach tightened. "That sounds serious." She nodded. "It is." The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Because for the first time, reality was coming for her. The world she'd been escaping was finally catching up, and judging by the look in Natalie's eyes as she stared out across the lake, she wasn't sure she wanted to go back. The world she'd been escaping was finally catching up, and judging by the look in Natalie's eyes as she stared across the lake, she wasn't sure she wanted to go back. The problem was that reality doesn't usually care what people want. Monday arrived cold and rainy. Dark clouds covered Pine Ridge. The mountains disappeared behind mist. Autumn had begun surrendering to winter. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, Natalie wasn't in the park. Emma noticed immediately. "She's not here." We stood beside the lake after school. The familiar bench sat empty beneath the maple tree. Somehow it looked smaller, lonelier. "She's in Denver." My daughter sighed. "I know." Another pause. "I still don't like it." Neither did I. The strange thing was how quickly we'd grown used to seeing Natalie every day, like she'd quietly become part of our routine, part of our lives. Around 6 o'clock that evening, my phone buzzed. A text message. From Natalie. "Hope Operation Happy Natalie is still active." I couldn't help smiling. I showed Emma. My daughter immediately grabbed the phone. "Tell Natalie she still has 83 things left on the list." A few moments later, a reply appeared. "That's honestly terrifying." Emma laughed so hard she nearly fell off the couch. Somehow, despite being 300 miles away in a corporate boardroom, Natalie was still making her smile. Tuesday passed, then Wednesday. The board meetings continued. So did the calls. Every evening Natalie sent a message. Sometimes to me, sometimes to Emma, usually both. The texts became part of our day. Small things, funny stories, questions about school, updates about Pine Ridge. Yet beneath every conversation, I sensed something else. Fatigue. Pressure. The life she'd briefly escaped pulling her back in. Then Thursday evening my phone rang. Natalie. I answered immediately. Hey. Silence greeted me for a moment. Then a tired laugh. Hi. Her voice sounded exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Long day? You have no idea. I sat down at the kitchen table. Emma immediately moved closer. Eavesdropping was one of her hobbies. Bad meeting? Natalie laughed softly. 4 bad meetings. Another pause. Possibly 5. I could hear city traffic in the background. Car horns. Sirens. Noise. The complete opposite of Pine Ridge. How's Emma? Natalie asked. My daughter immediately shouted. I can hear you. That made Natalie laugh for real. He Emma. Hi, Natalie. Another pause. You sound sad again. Complete silence followed. Even over the phone I could feel it. Natalie eventually sighed. A little. Emma frowned. Did you forget the notebook? What notebook? I asked. Operation Happy Natalie. My daughter sounded offended. Obviously. Natalie started laughing again. No, Emma. I didn't forget. Then what's wrong? The question was simple, honest, impossible to dodge. For several seconds, Natalie didn't answer. Finally, she spoke, quietly. I think I'm tired of being who everyone expects me to be. The room suddenly felt very still. Emma considered this carefully. Then gave the most Emma answer imaginable. So stop. Silence. Complete silence. Then Natalie burst out laughing. Not polite laughter, genuine laughter. The kind that arrives when somebody accidentally says exactly the right thing. You make everything sound easy. Maybe adults make everything too hard. The scary part was that she might have been right. The next afternoon, a black SUV pulled into Pine Ridge. Emma spotted it before I did. Naturally. She's back. I looked through the bookstore window of a cafe where we'd stopped for hot chocolate. Sure enough, the SUV rolled to a stop across the street. My heart immediately forgot how to behave. Natalie stepped out wearing a dark coat and carrying a travel bag. She looked exhausted, yet the moment she saw us through the cafe window, she smiled. The real smile. The one Emma brought out. She's here. My daughter launched herself toward the door. By the time Natalie entered the cafe, Emma had already reached her. You came back. Natalie hugged her tightly. For a brief second, the exhaustion vanished. I did. Good. My daughter stepped back. You were taking too long. Natalie laughed. Sorry. We spent the rest of the afternoon together. The park. The lake. The walking trails. Nothing special. Yet Natalie seemed to enjoy every second. More than that. She seemed relieved. Like she'd finally come up for air after being underwater too long. Then, as the sun began setting behind the mountains, we found ourselves sitting on the familiar bench beside the lake. Emma wandered off searching for important sticks. Apparently that was a thing, which left Natalie and me alone. The silence felt different now. Easier, more familiar. Can I tell you something? She asked quietly. Sure. Natalie looked out across the water. The sunset reflected gold and orange across the lake. For a moment she seemed unsure whether to continue. Then she smiled sadly. Last week, the board offered me another contract. My stomach tightened. A good one? She laughed softly. The kind people dream about. Another pause. More money, more power, more responsibility. And Natalie looked toward the place where Emma was collecting sticks, then back at the lake. Finally, she said the words that changed everything. For the first time in my life, I wasn't tempted. The silence that followed felt enormous, because sitting there beside the water while the mountains glowed beneath the setting sun, I realized something important. Natalie Sterling wasn't just questioning her old life anymore. She was starting to imagine a different one, and that possibility scared her almost as much as it excited her. Natalie Sterling wasn't just questioning her old life anymore. She was starting to imagine a different one. The problem was that imagining a new life and choosing one were two very different things. The following week became the happiest Emma had been in a long time, partly because Natalie was back, mostly because she'd decided Natalie officially belonged in our lives. Nobody had approved this arrangement, least of all Natalie, yet somehow it happened anyway. Every afternoon after school, we'd stop at Maple Park. Every afternoon, Natalie would already be there, waiting, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with books, sometimes with absolutely no reason at all. The strange thing was how natural it felt, as though she'd always been part of the routine, as though we'd simply forgotten her for a few years and were now catching up. One cold Thursday afternoon, Emma arrived carrying a notebook. Natalie immediately became nervous. Should I be worried? Probably. My daughter handed her the notebook proudly. Operation Happy Natalie. Natalie laughed. Still active? Always. She opened the notebook. Inside were dozens of handwritten entries, things that make Natalie smile. Number 1. Ducks. Number 2. Hot chocolate. Number 3. Sitting by the lake. Number 4. Laughing. Number 5. Friends. Natalie stopped reading. For a moment, her eyes remained fixed on the page. Then she quietly looked away. The emotion was impossible to miss. Emma noticed immediately. Are you crying? Natalie laughed softly. A little. Why? The CEO stared down at the notebook, then smiled. Because nobody's ever made a list like this for me before. Emma looked genuinely shocked. Really? Natalie nodded. Really? My daughter frowned. That's sad. The scary part was that she wasn't wrong. Later that afternoon, Emma wandered toward the playground. That left Natalie and me alone beside the lake. Snow drifted gently through the air. The deer reflected a pale winter sky. Everything felt quiet, peaceful. Then Natalie surprised me. You know what scares me most? I looked at her. What? For a moment she seemed unsure whether to answer. Then she laughed softly. Being happy. That wasn't the answer I expected. What do you mean? Natalie stared across the water. Because happiness gives you something to lose. The words settled heavily between us. She wasn't talking about business, or money, or success. She was talking about people, about connection, about family. I spent years convincing myself I didn't need any of it. Another pause. Turns out I was lying. The honesty hit harder than anything she'd said before. Because for the first time, she wasn't hiding behind her title, or her company, or her accomplishments. She was simply Natalie. A woman who'd spent years building walls around a broken heart. Then Emma crashed through all of them carrying a peanut butter sandwich. The thought almost made me smile. Natalie noticed. What? I shook my head. Nothing. That's a lie. I was thinking about how ridiculous this is. She laughed. Which part? The fact that one small kid basically kidnapped a CEO? Natalie laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. The board would hate that description. I'm keeping it. For several seconds, neither of us could stop smiling. Then something unexpected happened. Natalie's phone rang. The expression on her face changed immediately. Not fear, not frustration, something worse. Resignation. She stared at the screen. Didn't answer. Didn't move. Just stared. Everything okay? Natalie sighed. No. The honesty surprised me. It's Richard. The board chairman? She nodded. He keeps calling. Another pause. He wants me back full-time. Silence followed. The mountains stood quietly behind us. The lake barely moved. Even the world seemed to wait. What do you want? The question escaped before I could stop it. Natalie looked at me. Really looked at me. Then her eyes drifted toward Emma. My daughter was building a snowman that resembled a potato. Finally, Natalie answered, quietly. I don't know anymore. The words carried more weight than anything else she'd said. Because for the first time in her life, she genuinely didn't know. And that terrified her. The next evening, Pine Ridge hosted its annual winter festival. The entire town glowed beneath thousands of Christmas lights. Music drifted through the snowy streets. Families filled the square. Children laughed. The whole place looked magical. Natalie stood beside me, staring at the lights. For a moment, she looked emotional again. What? She smiled softly. I haven't felt like this in years. Like what? Her eyes moved across the crowd. The families, the couples, the children, the life she'd never allowed herself to have. Then she answered, like I'm home. My heart immediately forgot how to function. Before I could respond, Emma suddenly appeared, which should have worried us, because she was smiling. That smile, the dangerous one, the one that changed lives. Good news. Natalie immediately laughed. Should we be worried? Definitely. Emma held up 3 tickets, then pointed toward a large sign in the middle of the square. Winter Family Challenge. Couples, parents, children, teams, the works. My stomach dropped. Natalie covered her face. Emma looked delighted. We already signed up. The scary part wasn't the competition. It wasn't the festival. It wasn't even Emma's latest scheme. It was the way Natalie looked at me afterward. Because for the first time since we'd met, neither of us seemed interested in pretending this was just friendship anymore. For the first time since we'd met, neither of us seemed interested in pretending this was just friendship anymore. The problem was that Emma had absolutely no interest in moving slowly. The Winter Family Challenge began 20 minutes later in the center of Pine Ridge. Snow drifted gently through the air, while hundreds of Christmas lights illuminated the town square. Families gathered around booths, sipping hot chocolate and cheering for participants. Somewhere a choir was singing Christmas songs. Somewhere else children were throwing snowballs. The entire town looked like something from a holiday postcard. Unfortunately, my daughter viewed it as a strategic battlefield. Rule number 1. Emma held up a finger while leading us toward the registration table. No quitting. Natalie laughed. We're getting rules now? Several. My daughter looked proud. Rule number 2. I already hated this. Have fun. Natalie nodded. Reasonable. Rule number 3. Emma looked directly at both of us. No being weird. Complete silence followed. Natalie immediately started laughing. I covered my face. What does that even mean? Emma pointed dramatically. You know exactly what it means. The scary part was that I did. The challenge itself turned out to be surprisingly simple. Teams moved through town completing holiday-themed activities, decorating cookies, solving clues, building snow sculptures, finding hidden ornaments. The entire thing was designed for families, which became problematic almost immediately. At the cookie decorating station, Emma abandoned responsibility completely. You two do it. Natalie blinked. What? I'm supervising. My daughter sat down with a cup of hot chocolate and watched us work. Somehow that felt illegal. 10 minutes later, Natalie had frosting on her gloves, I had frosting on my jacket, and our cookies looked like they had survived a natural disaster. Emma gave us a 7 out of 10 for effort. Neither adult appreciated the score. The next challenge required teams to answer questions about one another. That was where things became dangerous. What is Caleb's favorite food? The volunteer asked. Emma answered immediately. Cheeseburgers. Correct. What is Emma's favorite book? Natalie smiled. Charlotte's Web. Also correct. Then the volunteer looked at Natalie. What is your favorite place? For a moment nobody spoke. Natalie looked surprised by the question. Then her eyes moved across the snowy town square. The lights, the families, the mountains beyond Pine Ridge. Finally they settled on Emma. Then me. Here. Silence followed. Complete silence. The volunteer smiled. Emma smiled. My heart completely forgot how to function. Natalie seemed surprised by her own answer. Yet she didn't take it back. Because it was true, we continued through the festival, one challenge after another, one laugh after another, one memory after another. Somewhere along the way, the competition stopped mattering. The points didn't matter. The prizes didn't matter. Being together did. Then reality arrived. It always did. Natalie's phone rang. The familiar tension returned immediately. She stared at the screen. Her smile faded. The warmth disappeared. I recognized the expression now. It was the face of someone being pulled between two worlds. Richard? I asked quietly. Natalie nodded. Again. For several seconds, she simply stared at the phone, then finally answered. Emma and I stepped away to give her privacy. The conversation lasted longer this time. 5 minutes. Then 10. By the time Natalie returned, something was wrong. Very wrong. The color had drained from her face. The happiness from earlier seemed distant. Natalie? She forced a smile. I'm okay. She wasn't. Emma noticed immediately. Of course she did. No, you're not. Natalie knelt beside her. Just work stuff. The sad kind. The question landed harder than intended. Natalie laughed softly. Yeah. Then I don't like your work. Neither did I. For a moment, Natalie simply stared at Emma. Emma, talked. Emma. Then she hugged her, tight, like she needed it more than Emma did. Later that evening, after the festival ended, we sat together on a bench overlooking the town square. Snow continued falling. Christmas lights glowed softly through the darkness. Most people had gone home. The world felt quieter now, smaller, more honest. Natalie stared at the lights for a long time before speaking. They want me back in Denver permanently. My chest tightened. There it was. The thing we'd both been expecting, the thing neither of us wanted to hear. When? She smiled sadly, immediately. Silence settled around us, the kind that hurts. Emma sat between us holding a cup of hot chocolate. She looked from Natalie to me and back again. Finally, she asked the question neither adult wanted to. Are you leaving? Natalie looked down. For the first time since we'd met her, she didn't seem to know what to say. Then she looked toward the mountains surrounding Pine Ridge, the town she'd accidentally fallen in love with, the life she'd never expected to want, the people she'd never expected to need. Finally, she answered honestly, I don't know. The words frightened her. I could hear it, because for the first time in years, the answer wasn't obvious. For the first time, staying sounded just as possible as leaving, and sitting there beneath the falling snow while Christmas lights shimmered across the town square, I realized something important. Natalie Sterling wasn't fighting the board anymore. She was fighting her own heart, and judging by the look in her eyes, she was losing. Natalie Sterling wasn't fighting the board anymore. She was fighting her own heart. And judging by the look in her eyes, she was losing. The problem was that Christmas has a way of forcing people to decide what matters most. The week after the winter festival felt different. Not bad. Just different. Something had changed. Natalie felt it. I felt it. Even Emma felt it. Nobody talked about it. Nobody needed to. The possibility hung quietly between us every time we met at the park. Every time we shared coffee. Every time Natalie laughed at one of Emma's ridiculous observations. Because now there was a deadline. Denver wanted her back. The board wanted answers. And sooner or later, she'd have to make a choice. 3 days later, Natalie arrived at Maple Park later than usual. The moment I saw her, I knew something had happened. She looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally, like she'd spent hours fighting a battle nobody else could see. Emma noticed too. The sad people called again. Natalie stared at her. How do you do that? My daughter shrugged. Your eyes. Natalie laughed softly. Apparently I'm not very mysterious. Nope. Emma handed her a cup of hot chocolate. Emergency supplies. Natalie accepted it with a grateful smile. For several minutes, the three of us sat together watching snow drift across the lake. Then Natalie's phone rang. Again, this time she didn't even look at the screen. She simply silenced it. You're not answering? I asked. Natalie stared across the water. I already know what they're going to say. Another pause. Come back. Fix everything. Save the company. Can you? She laughed softly. Probably. The answer wasn't arrogance, just honesty. That somehow made it worse. Emma frowned. Then why are you sad? Silence followed. Natalie looked at her, really looked at her, then smiled sadly, because sometimes fixing one thing means breaking another. The words lingered between us. Heavy, honest, real. Emma thought about this for several seconds, then gave the most Emma answer imaginable. That's a dumb rule. Natalie immediately burst out laughing. So did I. The scary part was that none of us could explain why Emma might actually be right. That Saturday, Pine Ridge hosted its annual Christmas market. The entire town square transformed into a winter wonderland. Handmade gifts, Christmas decorations, food stands, carolers, families everywhere. Natalie arrived wearing a dark green coat and a knitted scarf Emma had insisted she borrow. The moment she stepped into the square, people greeted her by name. Not because she was famous, because she belonged there now. Mrs. Dawson from the bakery waved. Coach Bennett stopped to say hello. Even old Mr. Walker, who disliked almost everyone, tipped his hat. Natalie noticed all of it. The surprise on her face never completely disappeared. They're happy to see you. I smiled. Of course they are. Why? The question sounded genuine. That was the heartbreaking part. She honestly didn't know. Because they like you. Natalie stared at me for several seconds, then looked away. The emotion in her eyes hit me harder than it should have, because somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten people could care about her without wanting something in return. Later that afternoon, Emma disappeared, which should have alarmed us immediately. Whenever my daughter vanished quietly, trouble usually followed. "Where is she?" Natalie asked. I looked around the crowded market. Good question. 10 minutes later, we found her standing beside the giant community Christmas tree in the center of town. She was talking to Mrs. Henderson, the most dangerous partnership in Colorado. No, I said it before either of them spoke. Emma looked offended. What? No. Mrs. Henderson laughed. You don't even know what we're doing. I know enough. Unfortunately, I didn't, because 30 minutes later, Natalie and I discovered the truth. Emma had signed us up for the Christmas wish ceremony, a Pine Ridge tradition where people wrote anonymous wishes and hung them on the community tree. That's not so bad. Natalie smiled. Easy for you to say. My daughter handed us each a card. You have to write one. We eventually gave in. Natalie stood beside the tree staring at the blank card for a long time. Longer than anyone else. Finally she wrote something, folded the card, hung it on a branch, then stepped back. What did you write? Emma asked. Natalie smiled. If I tell you, it won't come true. My daughter accepted that answer immediately. Later that evening, after the market ended and most people went home, volunteers began collecting the wish cards from the tree. The tradition was simple. Nobody read them. Nobody judged them. They were stored away until next Christmas. Except fate had other plans. Because as one volunteer carried a box of wishes across the square, a sudden gust of winter wind swept through town. Cards exploded into the air, hundreds of them, flying everywhere. The crowd laughed and chased them through the snow. Then one card landed directly at my feet. I bent down automatically and picked it up. I wasn't trying to read it. I didn't even know whose it was. Then I saw the handwriting, Natalie's handwriting. My heart stopped. For a moment I stared at the card. Every instinct told me not to look. Then my eyes caught a single line before I could stop myself. Just one sentence. One wish. One truth. I wish I was brave enough to stay. And standing there beneath the Christmas lights while snow drifted across Pine Ridge, I realized something important. Natalie already knew what she wanted. The only thing left was whether she'd have the courage to choose it. Natalie already knew what she wanted. The only thing left was whether she'd have the courage to choose it. The problem was that courage sounds simple until everything you've spent years building is standing on the other side of the decision. I stared at the wish card for only a second before folding it again. My heart was beating far too fast. Around me, people laughed while chasing runaway cards through the snow. Nobody else knew what I'd just read. Nobody else understood how much those 7 words mattered. I slipped the card back into the collection box without saying anything. Some truths belong to the person who wrote them. Even if they changed everything. Across the square, Natalie was helping Emma retrieve wishes that had blown into a flower bed. She was laughing, really laughing. For a moment, she looked younger, lighter, like the weight she'd been carrying for years had finally started to crack. Then her eyes found mine. Something passed between us. Not a conversation, not exactly, just a feeling. The sense that we were standing on the edge of something important. The following Monday, reality returned. Natalie received another call from Denver. This one couldn't be ignored. By noon, she was sitting on the familiar park bench beside the lake while snow drifted across the water. I found her there after finishing work. She didn't hear me approach. For several moments, she simply stared at the mountains, lost in thought. Bad day? She smiled faintly without looking at me. Getting predictable? A little. Natalie laughed softly, then sighed. The board gave me 48 hours. My stomach tightened. There it was, the deadline. The thing we'd all been pretending wasn't coming. For what? To decide. Her voice sounded tired. Either I return full-time and sign a new leadership agreement. Another pause, or I walk away. The words settled heavily between us. The lake remained perfectly still. Even the wind seemed quieter. What happens if you walk away? Natalie smiled sadly. Everyone thinks I'm making a mistake. That's not what I asked. For the first time, she looked at me. Really looked at me. Then the sadness softened. I know. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then she surprised me. Do you know what scares me? What? Natalie laughed quietly. The answer isn't complicated anymore. My heart immediately forgot how to function, because I understood exactly what she meant. A month ago she'd been lost, torn, confused. Now she wasn't. Now she knew exactly where she wanted to be. The only thing left was choosing it. That evening, Emma noticed something was wrong immediately. Of course she did. We were eating dinner when she set down her fork. Natalie. Yeah? You're thinking too loud. Complete silence followed. Natalie stared at her. Thinking too loud? Emma nodded seriously. You get that wrinkle. She pointed toward Natalie's forehead. Right there. I laughed. Natalie covered her face. Apparently I have a wrinkle now, only when you're worried. My daughter took another bite of mashed potatoes. You should stop. Natalie laughed despite herself. Thanks. Problem solved. You're welcome. The scary part was that Emma genuinely believed she'd helped. Later that night, after Emma had gone upstairs, Natalie and I sat on the front porch, watching snow fall across Pine Ridge. Christmas lights glowed softly along the street. The town felt peaceful. Safe. Home. Neither of us seemed eager to break the silence. Finally, Natalie spoke. I used to think success meant becoming the most powerful person in every room. Another pause. Now I think success might be having a room you actually want to come home to. The words hit harder than anything she'd said before. Because they weren't about business. They weren't about Denver. They weren't about money. They were about us. About Pine Ridge. About the life she'd accidentally discovered. Then her phone rang. Again. This time she looked at the screen for several seconds. The board chairman, Richard, calling once more. Natalie closed her eyes briefly. Then answered. The conversation lasted less than a minute. When it ended, she slipped the phone back into her coat pocket. Well? I asked. Natalie stared at the falling snow, then smiled, a small smile. Calm, certain, different. They want my answer tomorrow morning. My chest tightened. Tomorrow. After everything. After the park. After Emma. After the wishes. After the life she'd started building here. Tomorrow. Natalie looked toward the warm lights glowing inside my house, then toward the mountains beyond town. Finally, she whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. I already know what I'm going to say. My heart stopped. You do? She nodded. Slowly. Confidently. For the first time in weeks, there was no uncertainty in her voice. No confusion. No fear. Just truth. Then she looked at me, and the expression in her eyes told me everything before she ever said a word. The next chapter of her life wasn't waiting in Denver. It was waiting right here. The only question left was what would happen after she finally chose it. The next chapter of her life wasn't waiting in Denver. It was waiting right here. The only question left was what would happen after she finally chose it. The problem was that some decisions change everything the moment they're made. The next morning arrived beneath fresh snowfall. Pine Ridge looked like a Christmas card. White rooftops. Snow-covered trees. Holiday lights glowing against the gray winter sky. The entire town felt quiet, peaceful. Yet I couldn't focus on any of it, because somewhere in Denver, Natalie Sterling was about to make the biggest decision of her life. Around 9:30, my phone buzzed. One message, 3 words. It's done. My heart immediately forgot how to behave. Before I could respond, another message arrived. Can I call you later? I stared at the screen, smiling like an idiot. Then typed back, of course. The rest of the morning moved painfully slowly. Emma noticed immediately. You're smiling. Am I? Yep. My daughter narrowed her eyes. It's weird. Apparently happiness required explanation. By lunchtime, the entire town seemed to be preparing for Christmas. The bakery was packed. Main Street was crowded. Holiday music drifted from every storefront. Everything looked normal. Yet I couldn't stop checking my phone. Then finally, just after 2 o'clock, it rang. Natalie. I answered immediately. Hey. Silence greeted me first, then laughter. Not nervous laughter, Not exhausted laughter. Happy laughter. The kind people make when they finally put down something heavy. Natalie? Another laugh. I did it. I sat down instantly. What happened? Her voice softened. I resigned. My heart stopped. You what? Officially. Another pause. Effective immediately. Complete silence. I couldn't think of a single thing to say. Because this wasn't a temporary decision. This wasn't a vacation. This wasn't a break. She'd actually done it. Natalie laughed again. Everyone thinks I've lost my mind. Have you? Possibly. Another pause. Then her voice became quiet, emotional, honest. But for the first time in years, I can breathe. The words settled deeply inside me, because I could hear the truth in them. Then Natalie surprised me. Do you know what the first thing I did was? What? I drove. I smiled. Where? Another pause. Then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a turn signal. A passing truck. Tires on snow-covered pavement. My heart immediately sped up. Natalie? She laughed softly. Look outside. I stood so quickly, I nearly knocked over a chair. Then I moved toward the bookstore window. Across Main Street, a familiar black SUV rolled slowly through falling snow. My heart completely surrendered. No way. The vehicle pulled into a parking space directly in front of Mercer Books. The driver's door opened. Natalie stepped out, wearing a dark winter coat. Snowflakes settled in her hair. Her smile was brighter than I'd ever seen it. Hi. I was already halfway out the door. The cold air hit me immediately. Neither of us seemed to care. For several seconds, we simply stood there looking at each other, while snow drifted gently around us. Then Natalie laughed. That was probably dramatic. A little. Good. Another pause. I was aiming for dramatic. I couldn't stop smiling. Neither could she. Then a familiar voice exploded from inside the bookstore. She's here! Emma. Naturally. My daughter burst through the door and launched herself across the sidewalk. Natalie barely had time to react before receiving a full-speed hug. You came back. Natalie hugged her tightly. I did. For real? For real. Emma stepped back. Her eyes widened. Wait. Complete silence. My daughter looked between us, then at the SUV, then back at Natalie. Finally, she gasped. You picked us. Natalie froze. So did I. Because somehow, in one sentence, Emma had summarized everything. Denver, the company, the board, the future, the choice. Natalie looked down at her. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. Yeah. Her voice cracked slightly. I did. For a moment nobody spoke. Snow continued falling. Main Street remained quiet. The world seemed to pause. Then Emma smiled. The biggest smile I'd ever seen. Good choice. Natalie laughed through tears. I think so too. Later that evening, after the bookstore closed, the three of us sat together beside the fireplace. Hot chocolate, Christmas cookies, soft holiday music playing in the background, nothing extraordinary. Yet somehow it felt like one of the most important nights of my life. Because Natalie wasn't visiting anymore. She wasn't escaping. She wasn't passing through. She was here. Really here. Then, while Emma was busy decorating cookies into unrecognizable shapes, Natalie looked at me. The smile faded slightly, not because she was unhappy. Because something important was coming. Caleb. Just hearing my name in her voice was enough. Yeah? For a moment she looked nervous. More nervous than she'd ever looked, discussing billion-dollar companies. Then she smiled softly. I think we need to talk. My heart immediately forgot how to function, because judging by the look in her eyes, I had a feeling the conversation we'd both been avoiding was finally about to happen. And after that, nothing would ever be the same again. The conversation we'd both been avoiding was finally about to happen. The problem was that once certain words are spoken, there's no going back. The fire crackled softly inside Mercer Books. Christmas lights glowed in the windows. Outside, snow drifted across Main Street while Pine Ridge settled into another quiet winter evening. Emma sat on the floor decorating cookies, with enough frosting to concern medical professionals. Natalie sat across from me near the fireplace. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt different now. Not awkward, not uncertain, important. Finally, Natalie laughed softly. I had this whole speech planned. I smiled. You planned a speech? I spent 20 years running board meetings. She shrugged. Planning speeches is kind of my thing. And? Natalie covered her face briefly. Now I can't remember any of it. Somehow that made my heart hurt in the best possible way. Because for the first time since I'd met her, Natalie Sterling wasn't acting like a CEO. She wasn't acting like a leader. She wasn't acting like someone who had all the answers. She was simply a woman sitting beside a fireplace trying to tell the truth. She lowered her hands and looked at me. Caleb, yeah? Her eyes didn't leave mine. When I met Emma, her voice softened. I thought she was helping me survive a bad week. Another pause. I didn't realize she was helping me find my way back to myself. The honesty landed heavily between us. The fire popped softly behind the glass screen. Christmas music drifted quietly from the speakers. Everything else seemed to disappear. Then I met you. My heart immediately became a problem. Natalie smiled. Small, nervous, beautiful. And suddenly Pine Ridge stopped feeling like a place I was visiting. Another pause. It started feeling like home. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to, because I already knew what she was trying to say. The truth had been there for weeks, growing quietly between park benches, hot chocolate, Christmas lights, and conversations neither of us wanted to end. Then Natalie took a slow breath, the kind people take right before they stop running. I love you, Caleb. The world immediately went silent. Not literally. Just enough. Enough that all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Natalie laughed nervously. Okay. That sounded less terrifying in my head. I couldn't stop smiling. Good. She blinked. Good? Because I love you too. For a moment, she simply stared at me. Then relief washed across her face. Real relief. Like she'd been carrying those words for a very long time. Then she laughed. And suddenly I was laughing too. Not because anything was funny. Because happiness sometimes arrives all at once. Then a loud voice interrupted from across the room. Finally, we both turned. Emma stood beside the cookie table with frosting on her nose. What? Natalie asked. My daughter looked genuinely confused. You guys were taking forever. Complete silence followed. Then Natalie burst out laughing. Tears streamed down her face. I covered mine with both hands. You knew? Emma stared at us. Obviously, apparently subtlety had never been part of her skill set. My daughter walked over and placed her hands on her hips. I've been working on this for months. The scary part was that she wasn't wrong. Natalie knelt beside her. You planned this? Most of it. Emma nodded proudly. The sandwich helped. For several seconds none of us could stop laughing. Then something happened. Something simple, yet perfect. Natalie opened her arms. Emma immediately hugged her. Then Natalie looked at me. I joined them, just like that. The three of us standing together beside the fireplace while snow fell outside. Family. Not because we planned it. Not because we expected it. Because somehow we found each other. Christmas Eve arrived 2 days later. Pine Ridge glowed beneath thousands of lights. The town square overflowed with families, music, and celebration. The giant Christmas tree stood at the center of everything, beautiful and bright against the snowy night sky. The entire town seemed to be there. Naturally, Mrs. Henderson knew everything before anyone else. About time. She said it approximately 6 seconds after seeing us together. Natalie laughed. You knew too, honey? Mrs. Henderson smiled. The whole town knew. That was deeply concerning. The choir began singing Christmas carols. Children laughed. Snow drifted gently through the lights overhead. For a moment everything felt perfect. Then Emma tugged on Natalie's sleeve. One more thing. Every instinct I possessed immediately became nervous. Natalie smiled. What? My daughter handed her a folded piece of paper. Your Christmas present. Natalie opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing. 3 people standing beside a lake. 1 man, 1 woman, 1 little girl. Above them, Emma had written 4 simple words. My family at last. For several seconds, Natalie couldn't speak. Her eyes filled with tears. Then she pulled Emma into the tightest hug I'd ever seen. Thank you. Her voice cracked completely. You're welcome. Later that night, after the celebration ended and families headed home, we stood beneath the giant Christmas tree one last time. Snow drifted softly around us. Pine Ridge glowed in the distance. Natalie slipped her hand into mine. Emma stood between us holding hot chocolate, happy, safe, loved, exactly where she belonged. And watching them beneath the lights, I finally understood something important. Life doesn't always change because of big decisions. Sometimes it changes because an 8-year-old girl sees a lonely woman sitting on a bench. Sometimes it changes because she offers her a peanut butter sandwich. And sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the beginning of the family you've been searching for all along. The end.